In this video, I'm going to talk about what it means to have your natal Saturn placed in the second house. Now, on a mundane basic level, the second house is typically associated with material possessions and how we acquire them, and it's our wealth, maybe, the things that we have. It's a direct extension of the first house, which is us. It's first house is our persona, our physical body, our mask to the world. Extending from there is the second house, so it goes from what we are, who we are, to what we have and how we get it. But the mundane interpretation of the second house around what we have, material items, probably doesn't fully capture the full essence, the full esoteric meaning of the second house. Really, we can think about the second house to also include really not just what we have, but what we value, right? Because what we have and how we go about acquiring it and the energy we put into acquiring it really says as much about what we value and what we desire as it does about kind of the things themselves. So on an esoteric level, thinking about the first house, it's us. It's the integration of us. It's the lifelong integration of ourself through our experience. And the second house is sort of the process of experiencing and observing what's going on around us and deciding what is it we want. Here we are. That's all we know. What do we want? What do we value? What are we going to invest our time and energy in acquiring? Now, Saturn is typically considered a malefic planet, but really need to think about Saturn not only in terms of the challenges it brings, but also the opportunities it provides and the opportunities for growth and power and wisdom if we become aware of and acknowledge and work through the lessons that it presents us. Saturn, typically thinking about Saturn as kind of blockage and delay, kind of entrenchment and limitation, a really sort of rough interpretation of Saturn in the second house at first glance would be maybe bad, right? Maybe it means that we're not going to be able to acquire things, or we're going to be poor, or we grew up poor, not just in terms of a monetary value, but poor in the sense of not great access to resources or the things we want, or we're unable to achieve and obtain the desires that we have. And maybe to some extent, as a general TLDR, that can hold up a little bit. But I think we want to take it a little bit deeper. In any case, having Saturn here, having a slow-moving planet in this house, means that there's definitely going to be a preoccupation around second house themes, or these are going to be emphasized for better or for worse. If not necessarily, if Saturn doesn't necessarily produce sort of a direct effect on what our experiences or the tangible things that we actually have, it's going to affect our attitude towards second house themes, so toward what we value, right? So Saturn here could mean that there's a strong preoccupation with obtaining wealth and with someone's net worth. Like maybe there's a strong adoption of this sort of capitalist idea that our entire worth and our value system comes from what we've been able to procure, what we're able to buy, the kind of house we have, the car we drive, the money that we have in the bank. Saturn here can really sort of fix our attention or attitudes around those things, so that either this could describe someone that really wants those things and is always striving for them but can't get them, or else it's someone that through such hyper focus and determination and kind of Saturnian hyper focus has gotten all of those things, and they could be incredibly materially successful and wealthy, and yet there's always this fear of losing it all. Like maybe it's a person that's actually gotten and worked for and obtained everything they've always wanted, and yet they never quite feel satisfied. It never feels good enough. When we move away from the mundane interpretation to a more like esoteric one, instead of Saturn here being, more of a restriction on our ability to have and own the things we desire, it could be just a blockage from us actually like authentically connecting with what it is we really truly value. And maybe that's not material and monetary things. Maybe it's other stuff. Maybe it's creative expression or our friendships or our love relationships. So if we don't really value money or monetary things, like the second house isn't really about that stuff. It's about the stuff that we value. Taking a look back at someone's early childhood and upbringing, Saturn here again could mean that this person kind of grew up poor and really challenging material circumstances. Or it could also mean someone that grew up like incredibly wealthy. Everything they could ever have wanted, they were handed. And maybe because of that, they weren't really able to truly develop and explore and cultivate their inner values, their qualitative, non-monetary, non-tangible values. And so their sort of Saturnian process here is going to be one of actually figuring out and coming to terms with what it is they do want and what is going to kind of give them meaning and purpose. Wherever Saturn shows up in the chart too, there's always usually some kind of repressed issue, like there's something else going on, which usually causes, well, if the individual is not aware of that kind of inner conflict, it usually is always going to result in some kind of projection outwards, right? So if someone is sort of struggling, they're living their life from a feeling of lack, of a deficit, right? They're going to see people that have a lot and are successful, and they're going to be a little bit angry, like, why are they successful and why is life so unfair? Like, why can't this happen to me? If it's someone that's kind of very intentionally rejected material things, right? They, see people that maybe don't feel the same way, that do enjoy those things, as incredibly like greedy or shallow or materialistic, right? And those people could be all those things, right? But like the crux of those attitudes are really, it's a projection, and it's a product of someone's own sort of unworked through Saturn lessons, for lack of a better description. What we strongly hate in others like really lurks in our own unconscious. The way towards overcoming Saturn here is, again, kind of becoming aware of those attitudes and figuring out what we want, what we desire, what we truly desire, not just what we think we do or what we think we need to do to attract someone, or what our parents taught us to value. This really has nothing to do with objects or possessions. It's way beyond that. It's coming to terms with what we value. And we often think about values as things that we just like pick from a tree, like, I'll have one of these values. Like I value charity, or I value being like a good friend. We just kind of pick them, don't really do much. But values are really much deeper, and they're much more measurable almost. As Carl Jung, said, our values are really just, it's almost like they're a unit of life energy, right? Just take, the way that we spend our time in a day, what we spend that time doing or focusing on, that's what you value. Like you can pick any value you want from a hat that sounds great on paper, but if you're spending 3 hours a day on your phone, or you're spending X amount of hours working at a job to earn money, like the time that we spend, the portion of our life that we're spending on these things, those are what we value, right? Like it or not. And so we all, regardless of what our charts look like, are going through a lifelong sort of process of hopefully refining and arriving to a more conscious and intentional place of directing our energy towards the values that are really aligned with us. But this process is going to be especially poignant and pronounced for someone with Saturn in the second house. So, and again, like Saturn here is not a curse for being successful and being materially stable and having all the wealth that you could ever want. Saturn here is not going to prevent that, and you can't blame it, right? It's really a learning tool, and once someone kind of figures out and sorts out what they value from what other people value, and decides that whatever it is they do value, they deserve to have it, and they can certainly have it, and there's nothing which prevents them from having an abundant life full of all those values. Saturn can really be a huge advantage, right? Because it helps us crystallize things for better and for worse. Once someone gets all that sorted out, Saturn is, it's the engine, it is the kind of perpetual motor that's going to help carry out those intentions. That's all for this video. If you enjoyed it, please like it and subscribe to my channel.